The most dangerous person isn't the loud, flamboyant one, or the one who asserts themselves through brute force. The most dangerous one is quiet, observing, gathering every detail of the environment, interactions, and most importantly, the intentions lingering in the air, often hidden under masks of kindness. Have you ever wondered who truly holds power in a room? Is it the one who dominates everyone or the one who senses everything? Today, I want to propose a perception challenge. What if everything you thought about sensitivity and strength was completely wrong? Imagine someone who, for years, was called too sensitive, fragile, or even a dreamer. Someone who felt the pain of others as if it were their own, who cried in secret and questioned if they belonged in this noisy, often cruel world. Think for a second. Is this supposedly fragile being, the empath, truly weak? Or has all this suffering, all this sensitivity, forged in the flames of pain, a silent strength that the world simply underestimates? There's a hidden power in empathy when it's understood, integrated, and above all, when it embraces its own shadow. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. The terrifying strength of the awakened empath, in light of Carl Jung's depth psychology. Get ready. What you're about to discover might just turn your perception completely upside down. By the way, before we dive deep, if you've ever felt like your sensitivity is a curse, or know someone who has, go ahead and hit that like button, comment, "I feel it," below, and subscribe to the channel, because what's coming next, you won't want to miss. Let's discover together why, contrary to popular belief, the true empath might be the most transformative and dangerous presence of all. Now, close your eyes for a few seconds and imagine, what would your life be like if, instead of being manipulated by others' emotions, you were able to decipher them, master them, and even turn the tables in your favor? In the next segment, we're going to unmask the great paradox of the empath. You'll be surprised. Empath. How many times has this word been used to describe someone fragile, emotional, or even an easy target for manipulators and narcissists? Maybe you see yourself in that mirror, or know someone like that. But do you truly understand the paradox hidden behind this sensitivity? Jung would say that what's seen at first glance as weakness often conceals the roots of a power few have the courage to awaken. Carl Gustav Jung, the father of analytical psychology, wrote, "What you resist persists, what you accept transforms." And this is precisely where the empath's turning point begins. The empath is traditionally seen as someone too vulnerable for the aggressive world we live in. Someone who suffers, absorbs pain, and often doesn't know how to protect themselves. But what if this initial suffering isn't a sign of weakness, but rather a hidden invitation to the deepest self-knowledge a human being can experience? Have you noticed how some people, after going through devastating disappointments and betrayals, just change? And it's not a superficial change. It's almost as if something inside them dies to make way for a completely new being, more resilient and impossible to manipulate. This is the empath's paradox. The one who feels intensely, when they awaken to their own power, becomes absolutely impossible to deceive, because they've already seen the worst inside and out. And as Jung said, know all the theories, master all the techniques, but as you touch a human soul, be just another human soul. Have you ever felt there's something about you beyond what the world sees? That your pain, your sensitivity, could actually be the fertile ground for unexplored strength? Hold that thought. In the next segment, you'll understand, once and for all, why Jung's depth psychology is the key to transforming the burden of empathy into a true superpower and not a burden. Stay with me, because now we're entering the realm of persona and shadow, and I guarantee you'll never look at yourself the same way again. Imagine that every person you meet, including yourself, wears a mask every day. No, I'm not talking about falseness. I'm talking about the persona, that social role we play to be accepted, understood, and even loved. Now, pause for a moment. Take a deep breath. Feel, behind every mask, there's something we try to hide. Something we prefer to ignore, but that insists on knocking on the door at the most unexpected times. Jung called this the shadow. And for the empath, this relationship with their own shadow is even more intense, because they feel not only their own pain, but also the pain of others. Have you ever caught yourself running from emotions considered negative? Anger, envy, pride. How many times have you hidden your feelings to avoid disappointing anyone? Empaths by nature tend to repress their shadows to protect others. But here's the secret. The more we deny the existence of this hidden part, the more it gains strength in the unconscious. And when we least expect it, it explodes in ways we can't always control. Pay attention. True psychological maturity isn't denying or repressing the shadow. It's integrating it. It's looking into the eyes of your internal ghosts, understanding their messages, and then regaining control over yourself. Jung stated, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For the empath, this process is even more vital. Why? Because only those who deeply feel their own shadows can, in fact, decipher others' masks. Think about it. An empath, when they run from their own shadow, becomes an easy target for manipulators who quickly identify their unhealed wounds. But when they embrace their darkness, they become almost impossible to deceive. They see what no one else sees. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you were no longer ashamed of your forbidden emotions? If instead of hiding your anger, your hurt, your frustration, you use them as a compass to better understand the world and yourself? In the next segment, I'll show you how the tension between opposites light and shadow, empathy and self-preservation, can actually be your greatest evolutionary asset. Stay with me, because now the true transformation begins. In nature, everything is made of opposites: day and night, summer and winter, joy and sadness, love and fear. Life pulses between extremes, and it's precisely between them that humanity's greatest power of transformation lies hidden. Jung called this phenomenon the tension of opposites. Have you ever noticed how within you there's a silent battle? On one side, the desire to please, to give in, to feel everything; on the other, the desire to protect yourself, to set boundaries, to withdraw. For the empath, these extremes are even more intense. It's as if they live eternally on a tightrope, trying to balance love for the world with love for themselves. But here's the point. The ability to endure this tension, to not immediately flee from discomfort, is what separates those who mature from those who remain prisoners of their own emotions. Jung believed that when we can stay between two seemingly irreconcilable opposites, what's called the transcendent function emerges within us. What is that? Simple. It's when the mind finds a third way, a creative and totally new solution, capable of integrating elements previously seen as incompatible. For the empath, when they stop choosing between feeling everything or completely shielding themselves, but learn to move between the extremes, a devastating and irresistible emotional maturity emerges. Imagine, instead of impulsively reacting to others' suffering, the empath begins to analyze patterns, perceive subtleties, and recognize what's theirs and what belongs to others. They learn not to sacrifice themselves anymore, but also don't lose their compassion. They unite strength and sensitivity, intuition and analysis, becoming rare, magnetic, and impossible to manipulate. Have you ever felt, at some point, that you were on the verge of an internal breakthrough? As if you were about to give up, but something inside you mysteriously pushed you to a new level of self-awareness? This is the tension of opposites working silently, forging within you the foundation of a new power. And here's a revelation. The more you sustain this tension without running away, the more life begins to show you new possibilities. You see beyond the obvious, perceive what no one is saying, and sense when something isn't right, even before any rational evidence. This is the beginning of the empath's real power. In the next segment, we're going into a dark and fascinating field: the narcissist's fatal error in underestimating the empath's inner strength, and how, in a silent confrontation, the awakened empath can become the most unshakable force in the universe. Don't go anywhere. Now is when the game truly turns forever. Now that you've glimpsed the empath's hidden potential, it's time to expose one of the most common and devastating psychological traps in human relationships: the silent clash between empaths and narcissists. Have you noticed how narcissists see another's sensitivity as an invitation to manipulation? For the narcissist, empathy is synonymous with weakness. The empath seems malleable, willing to forgive, ready to sacrifice. But here's the big mistake. The narcissist always underestimates the empath's depth, because they only see the surfaces. Narcissists operate on the level of ego, appearances, seduction, and control. They are experts at masking intentions, creating illusions, and exploiting vulnerabilities. But the empath, when awakened, doesn't just see words or gestures. They feel what's behind the smiles, perceive the dissonance between discourse and intention, and pick up on the smallest microsignals: a hesitation in the eyes, a false tone of voice, an absence of warmth in a touch. The empath who has suffered and been manipulated carries a psychological radar within them. And contrary to what the narcissist thinks, pain doesn't make the empath more vulnerable, it makes them smarter. Imagine two players on opposite sides of a chessboard. One believes they're dealing with a weak piece, easy to take down. The other observes every move, calculates risks, and learns from the opponent's attempts. At first, the narcissist feels like they're winning. Their tactics seem effective because the empath, out of loyalty and compassion, still hesitates to protect themselves. But there comes a point when the empath understands the game, and then everything changes. This turning point is subtle and devastating. The empath begins to see the pattern, perceives the cycle of abuse, the emotional loop imposed by the manipulator, and instead of getting lost, they retreat, observe, and stop giving the narcissist what feeds them, their emotional energy. The narcissist, accustomed to easy prey, realizes they've lost power. It's like a curtain falling, revealing the true dance. The empath isn't a victim, but a master of profound insight. Think of real-life examples. How many people have you seen break free from toxic relationships after years of suffering and emerge with unshakable strength? On the surface, it seemed like the narcissist was in control. But in the emotional underground, the empath was collecting experiences, storing data, and creating self-defense tools. The awakened empath's power isn't in direct confrontation, but in withdrawing, becoming silent, and cutting off the narcissist's supply: attention, validation, drama. The narcissist panics, tries everything to regain control, but it's too late. The empath is now imperturbable, invulnerable to old enchantments. The game has turned. Now I want to ask you, in your life, have you ever noticed someone trying to manipulate you through your sensitivity? Have you felt the moment when suddenly the energy shifted and you stopped being a victim to become the protagonist of your own story? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story can help other empaths see their own potential. And remember, in the next topic, you'll discover how suffering is, in fact, the catalyst for the empath's psychological growth. Stay with me, because now we're going to unravel the secret alchemy that transforms pain into power. Have you ever heard of people who, after a great loss or disappointment, simply seem to be reborn? A transformation so profound it's impossible to ignore. In Jung's language, this process has a name: individuation. Individuation is the path of self-discovery, of integrating the various parts of our being, of maturity and authenticity. For many, this journey is slow, gradual, marked by small epiphanies throughout life. But for the empath, there's a shortcut, and it's called suffering. Yes, I know. This isn't a comfortable truth. But look back at the most difficult moments of your life. They were what made you stronger, not by hardening you, but by expanding your consciousness. The empath, after a betrayal, a manipulation, a great loss, experiences a kind of psychological death. It's as if the old version of themselves ceases to exist, giving way to a new identity. Jung described this as a rite of passage, the descent into one's own underworld. In this dive into pain, the empath is forced to face their own shadow, to revise their internal pacts, to abandon beliefs and patterns that kept them trapped in the cycle of suffering. It's not an easy process. In fact, it's one of the loneliest experiences anyone can live. But it's there, in the darkness, that the empath begins to see their true light, not the false light of the persona, but the clarity of someone who has faced the abyss of their own being. Suffering for the empath isn't a punishment, it's an accelerator. While many spend years avoiding pain, the empath, by being forced to face it, ends up skipping steps in the process of self-construction. Every disappointment becomes a step, every tear becomes fuel. And the deeper they fall, the higher they can be reborn. Have you ever felt at some point that after surviving the storm, nothing could ever bring you down again? That what once destroyed you became your greatest strength? This is how a silent, almost supernatural force is born. The empath discovers their own psychological immortality. What would kill them, pain, is now an inexhaustible source of wisdom and power. And don't think this is just theory. Great leaders, artists, and social transformers around the world have histories of profound suffering. They learned, as you can learn, to make their own wounds gateways to growth. In the next segment, you'll understand how this sensitivity, once seen as a weakness, becomes the empath's greatest superpower, an infallible tool against manipulations and emotional attacks. Get ready. It's time to turn the tables forever. Up to this point, you might have already understood that there's something beyond mere vulnerability in the awakened empath's journey. But now, I want to show you how this apparent sensitivity, often seen as a weakness, is in fact the greatest superpower of this psychological profile. Imagine that every emotional experience, every disappointment, every joy, and every pain are like data processed by an incredibly powerful artificial intelligence, your own mind and heart. The empath doesn't just feel their own feelings, but picks up on nuances, micro-expressions, silences, and even the weight of what's unsaid. And that's where the shift happens. Instead of being sucked into the emotional chaos around them, the empath learns to use this information as a shield and a compass. Have you noticed how people who feel a lot tend to anticipate conflicts, intuit lies, and recognize behavioral patterns before everyone else? The empath, being accustomed to absorbing environments and relationships, develops a refined sensitivity, a kind of social and emotional radar. This subtle reading is what allows them to identify manipulations before they solidify. While the manipulator is setting up their theater, the empath already perceives the script. They feel the discomfort in the air, know when a word doesn't match the energy, when a touch hides resentment. Herein lies the secret. Every wound from the past becomes a database, generating parameters for evaluating new situations. The awakened empath doesn't blindly repeat the same mistakes. With each new relationship, they bring with them a wealth of emotional references, signs, alerts, impressions that guide their choices. And this ability isn't just protection, it's a strategic advantage. Imagine someone entering a negotiation, job interview, or even a new romantic relationship. While others are focused on what's said, the empath is analyzing authenticity, coherence, and the alignment between words and energy. They know when someone is being truthful and when they're just wearing a mask. What's more, the empath, with their high emotional intelligence, also develops an incredible capacity for self-control and self-awareness. This autonomy comes from learning that feeling a lot doesn't mean getting lost. On the contrary, it means knowing how to differentiate oneself from others and set clear boundaries without guilt. That's why, over time, the empath stops being an easy target for narcissists and manipulators. They become strategic, independent, and even inspiring to those around them. Their sensitivity becomes an invisible shield, capable of absorbing attacks without being contaminated, a lantern in the darkness of human relationships. But tell me, what about you? Have you ever used your sensitivity to protect yourself from a toxic situation? Or do you know someone who transformed their pain into discernment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. These stories are fundamental for strengthening an entire community of empaths. And don't forget, if you haven't liked this video yet, now's the time. This helps our message create a ripple effect, inspiring other empaths to discover their own superpower. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the final stretch of this journey, because soon, in the next topics, we'll reveal how the awakened empath becomes immune to manipulation and finally integrates their shadow, truly embracing the role of protagonist and hero of their own life. Stay with me, because the next step is decisive. Have you ever felt at some point in your life that you woke up from a long sleep? As if suddenly you saw what was once invisible, patterns, motivations, intentions that were always there, but that you can only now decipher? This is the moment of the empath's awakening. It's not a sudden snap like in movies. It's a process. It starts timidly, with small suspicions, inner doubts, that voice that says, something's wrong here. The awakened empath is no longer beholden to others' approval, nor a slave to the fear of disappointing. They've suffered enough to know they'll survive rejections, criticisms, and even loneliness. This knowledge, in itself, is liberating. Think of the times you followed the instinct to protect others and completely forgot to protect yourself. For years, the empath submits, tolerates, overlooks in a seemingly endless cycle of giving, giving, giving. But one day, something changes. They realize that by giving without limits, they are actually betraying themselves. This is where the power is born. The awakened empath refuses to negotiate their own values just to maintain superficial relationships. They learn, finally, to say no, and they don't feel guilty. They discover they can set boundaries without abandoning compassion. Because in truth, true empathy begins when you learn to include yourself on your own list of important people. Awakening is that turning point, from servitude to emotional autonomy. With this new perspective, the empath learns to play a new game. They stop reacting to common manipulations, emotional blackmail, blame shifting, silent treatments, veiled threats. Instead of falling into traps, they observe, understand, and most importantly, don't let themselves be affected. It's as if they finally cut the invisible string that linked their actions to external validations. Now they are driven by their own center, by a happiness that doesn't depend on applause or praise, but that stems from the alignment between what they feel and what they do. This is psychological autonomy, the freedom to no longer belong to others' scripts, but to write their own story. This immunity doesn't mean insensitivity. The awakened empath still feels everything, but now they choose what they absorb, what they return, and where they want to invest their energy. Like an emotional alchemist, they transform suffering into compassion, indignation into discernment, anguish into clarity. Ask yourself now, can you identify today situations where you're being manipulated? Or do you notice how your responses have changed after traumatic experiences? Leave your story in the comments below. Reading and sharing experiences strengthens the collective and shows that no one is alone on this journey. And it doesn't stop there. In the next topic, we'll go further. You'll discover how integrating your own shadow transforms the empath into a being of absolute discernment, capable of protecting their energy without losing their humanity. What does it truly mean to integrate one's shadow? It's not a mystical concept, nor self-deception. Jung said, "What you don't want to look at is precisely where you should seek." The shadow isn't a monster, but a set of emotions, memories, and impulses that we repress because they don't fit the ideal we project. For the empath, living with the shadow is an even more challenging task, because their self-pressure to be good, just, and understanding is immense. Integrating the shadow means looking at your own anger, envy, pride, jealousy, and saying, "I recognize you, and I accept that you're part of me too." Not to act dominated by these feelings, but so that they don't unconsciously take over our behaviors. No one becomes enlightened by denying the darkness, but by bringing light to it. For the empath, shadow integration is revolutionary. You know that fear of seeming selfish by saying no? Or of being seen as cold for protecting yourself. It disappears when the empath understands that their boundaries aren't cruelty, but self-preservation. That their anger can be a compass to show where it hurts and where healing is needed. That their sadness is legitimate and needs to be felt, so it doesn't turn into resentment or silent frustration. From this acceptance, discernment is born. The empath doesn't transform into someone cold, distant, or insensitive. On the contrary, their compassion is refined. They sense when someone deserves a chance, a listening ear, a hug, but they also know how to recognize when they're facing a manipulator, an energy vampire, someone who only approaches to drain. It's discernment, not coldness, that defines the integrated empath. They learn to observe their emotions as signals, not sentences. Am I irritated near this person? Maybe they're overstepping my boundaries. Do I feel exhausted after certain encounters? Time to reevaluate the emotional investment. The shadow stops being an enemy and becomes a guardian. This process, though challenging, is the deepest form of power an empath can experience. Because now they are no longer tossed about by the ocean of others' emotions. They navigate safely, knowing exactly when to open their heart and when to simply close the door. And in all of this, the empath discovers that they don't need to dim their light for others to shine. They don't need to lessen their light, nor sacrifice their peace to please. By integrating their shadow, they redefine their own value, naturally command respect, and begin to attract much more authentic and healthy relationships. Now pause. Ask yourself, what part of your shadow are you still afraid to face? What would your life be like if you could fully accept who you are with both light and shadow? Share your experience or reflection in the comments. Sharing is an act of courage, and it can inspire others to do the same. In the next segment, we'll close this journey by elevating the empath to the role of a true hero, showing how their trajectory connects with the most powerful archetype in depth psychology. We've reached the peak of our journey, and if you've stayed this long, it's because something deep down resonated with your own story. Maybe you recognized yourself in this narrative, the empath who, for most of their life, felt marginalized, misunderstood, even broken, in a world that extols aggressive strength and ignores the power of feeling. But now, armed with knowledge about shadow, persona, the tension of opposites, discernment, and autonomy, you can understand that the empath, far from being a victim, is destined to be a protagonist. Ultimately, this is the true hero's journey, and Jung knew that. Every hero begins in crisis, feeling displaced, lost, facing challenges that seem beyond their strength. But it's precisely the call to the dark side, to the traversing of their own fears, that gives them the power that changes everything. They return to the world not as someone who wants to be accepted, but as someone who accepts themselves. The integrated empath inspires, heals, protects, and transforms. Their greatest strength is emotional sovereignty, the power to feel without getting lost, to love without annihilating oneself, to understand without sacrificing. They are a beacon. Their courage is silent, but it overflows in their actions. They know they are part of something larger, an invisible web that connects us all. And by exploring their own abyss, they discover that they were never alone. So, if this journey touched you, share this video right now. Like, comment, subscribe to the channel because we need more and more awakened, authentic, and courageous empaths in this world full of falsehoods and masks. Leave a comment below. When did you realize your strength? How did integrating your shadow change your life? Your story could be the breath of hope someone in the dark needs today. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to access more stories like this. And remember, the world needs your unique light, your deep gaze, your courage to feel. Don't let sensitivity be a source of shame. Celebrate it, share it, and inspire. The true power of the empath is to transform the world from the inside out, and that's the most extraordinary thing anyone can accomplish. If you've read this far, congratulations on honoring your own journey. See you in the next video.